So, in light of the alleged situation, um, one of the things that really stood out was the statement "decolonize the mind," right? And I'm pretty sure that was a book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Um, we often judge the oppressed for not being in a mind state that they didn't put themselves in, right? And we sometimes we don't have compassion for how much was actually done to us, and I'm guilty of that myself. But can you talk a little bit more about what actually decolonizing the mind means? And most of us think it's just looking at a god that looks like you, or a savior that looks like you, or even having teachers that look like you. But could there be a more nuanced thing that we're missing?
That's a very loaded question.
Okay. Well, what does decolonizing the mind mean to you, or what was your first encounter with that book? Especially, you mentioned it being a set book when you were in high school, I think.
It's been a common reading in schools in Kenya.
Right.
But you see, you need to look at Ngugi wa Thiong'o's writings.
Hmm.
It's all about the changes that take place, technically the negative effects that take place as a result of colonialism, an actual event colonialism.
Right.
And to him, that interaction influenced the African in such a way that his way of life was changed.
Right.
And to succeed, he had to adopt many of the so-called traits and characteristics of the white person, to an extent that the African internalized this thing to an extent that, and this one I'm saying it from a general perspective, everything white was good, everything black was bad.
Right. Everything
And it
white.
still continues.
Right. Right.
So such that you even used to hear in offices people saying, I dress like the white man, I eat like the European, I walk like the European. They all try to speak English as a Londoner.
That's exactly what his core argument was, according to this, is that Ngugi argues that the continued dominance of European languages like English in post-colonial Africa perpetuates a colonial mindset and hinders the development of a distinct African identity and culture.
That is true. But the conclusions we make about that
Hmm.
is what I don't agree with him.
Okay.
Because that train has already left the station.
Right.
No amount of ropes can bring it back.
Right.
So thinking that we can get back to what we had is as absurd as a few men with a few horses and emaciated cows tying them to ropes and trying to bring this train back. It is that absurd. And that is why I've told you that we might agree on what decolonization might entail,
Right.
but completely disagree on why we are doing it or how we should do it.
Right. Wow.
Because you see, we are confronted with first order realities and basic needs.
Mhm.
If you are looking at it from that perspective, just doing just the normal things that Africans used to do, like men providing for their families.
Mhm.
You see, take your father, for example,
Mhm.
because of where he was, the realization that he needed to be competitive enough to be able to access the meager resources that were available during his time meant that he had to outdo the others in adopting the white man's education, becoming competitive that way to access the few positions that were abroad so that he can raise his family there. It doesn't matter how much he knew that he needed to decolonize his mind. In fact, your father might have been number one in that class about decolonizing the mind and understanding Ngugi wa Thiong'o's book. But he knew to feed his family, just a basic need. He had to do certain things that had nothing to do with whether they would be perceived or not to be decolonizing the mind or not. These are just realities that he had to confront.
Right. Right.
The realities that you are confronting are different from his. He has already provided for you with the basic. So you are not limited by the same limitations that he had. And therefore, your decolonization of the mind presents itself very differently.
Wow.
Because it is not confronted by a reality of going hungry or being without shelter or having a child you can't feed.
So you're saying the decolonizing of the mind actually depends on the colonized state of the environment of said mind.
Exactly. It is mediated by certain real environmental issues that are beyond the control of this discussion.
Wow. Wow. So one of the things that I'm starting to realize as well is the parallel processing of various states. And I think that sometimes when we talk about Africa and when we talk about decolonizing the mind or even Pan-Africanism, right? We're struggling to find unity while also really being confronted with the harsh reality that not only are we not monolithic, but we can't even count the ways that we're different, right? There's so many different ways. How do you account for all of the various differences that we have, even though there's so much similarity in how we were colonized, right? We weren't a singular people to begin with. So how can we decolonize our minds in a similar way if we weren't even a similar people to begin with, right? Everybody had their own ethnic groups, their own ways of life, et cetera, right? So
Even if
what
we
you're
were
saying
the
is very
same,
true.
Victor,
Hmm.
even if we were the same,
Hmm.
every time you look at something, its very existence is completely meaningless without regard to the images you create in your mind about them. I see an elephant. Somebody sees something, if you put in a zoo, will attract, or in a forest, will become a tourist attraction. Somebody else sees it and sees the tusk and immediately sees a market in Asia. Somebody who is a farmer sees the elephant and sees the destruction that is going to be of his crops if this animal was to be allowed to be there. A government official sees it and sees the Maasais will look at it and decide this is meat. I need to protect it. I need to take it far away. The same thing by the same people looking at it, but the images they create about it are that varied. And we are only talking of something, even we agree by name that it is an elephant, and we know it is an animal, we know it eats grass. So there is so much we agree about it, yet we have all these different images about it. Think about colonialism. That is even far removed from the generation that is in existence. That you ask them colonialism and they ask you, who colonized us? How? What were our people doing? Why did they allow to be colonized? You find once you introduce some of these topics, the discussions that come in are purely driven by ignorance. How do we get to where you want to get when there is not even a starting point?
Wow.
And this is why I'm telling you, we need a more basic element. Sometimes we need to tell people what actually you mean by colonialism.
Yeah, I agree. Not to mention, and this is something that I'm thankful for because you do this a lot when you talk to me. You recognize that I'm I'm not coming into a situation with intellectual compassion, and that lack of compassion blinds me from seeing all of the other aspects that that could be at play, right? Just because the point of reference is from a point of judgment and not observation, right? And so,
Exactly.
that's something that I will definitely work on because oftentimes we're angry uh at whether it be individually or our people, but I need to check my own privilege in that, right? Because not only was
Exactly.
I was too privileged from being able to have a father, but also being able to be raised in America where I had access to libraries that a person in a village would never have access to. And so the ability to decolonize my mind was privileged to me by factors that had nothing to do with me, right? And
Would
that
you say your mind is decolonized?
no, I'm saying but even that, right? Yeah, that in itself is still a bias, right? Because uh
Exactly.
this is really opening my eyes to realize that the judgment will actually prevent your ability to perceive so many factors that would help you decolonize even your own mind, right?
Mhm.
Because the bias here is in thinking that I have a more decolonized mind than they do, right? And that's a bias that I would have to check as well, right? Because you can't say decolonize the mind and the whole world was encompassed by white supremacy in various stages, degrees, times, and intensities, right? And you have to be able to gauge that. So I think the first thing would be to create a scale, right? And that scale would have to be how much was a land colonized, right? And what is the definition of colonized, right? And then gauge how much, and then gauge that damage, right? Because how can we assess a damage if we haven't, created a scale, right? And that scale could be based on autonomy of government or foreign control, like some countries like Congo, you stated, didn't even have a government to rule itself, right? And then Kenya,
Even that scale you are talking about,
mhm,
are we thinking of a linear scale?
a linear scale or not, right? So again, like that starting place
We-
where you're
we-
saying is it's almost impossible to pinpoint, right? Um,
and my point is,
mhm,
is it possible to get that starting point where we now say from here we start the decolonization? Because for it to take place, we must capture our brains. And by capturing them, it's completely erasing everything that exists. And then we reprogram them afresh. Can we reprogram them to what we want them to be when the existing program software 1.0 is still in existence? You can't delete that software that is already in our minds to be able to install this 2.0, that is decolonization.
right,
To
right,
do it, we must still figure a way of doing it on top, overwriting the current one. And you know how that plate goes. Try to write something on top of another one. You make both of them illegible. So is it even possible for a decolonization to take place?
wow, wow. Where would you start personally with that question?
We are now an integrated. Society.
Hmm.
The problems of the current world must be more threatening, must be allowed to reach a point where they are more threatening to our existence than issues of shelter, food, and what is the other basic need that we have?
Food, water, clothing,
Food, water. Exactly. They must be
and
that
shelter.
threatening. If they threatened us more, then we'll consider them now as a survival issue that
Right.
must be dealt with before now we deal with issues of existence
Right.
of the
And
basic needs.
come to think of it, this reminds me of, something Jasiri X told me, man. Shout out Jasiri, the OG. Jasiri, when I was having a discussion with him about image, and he said, how can you have this discussion with people who are worried about eating, right? They don't even care
Exactly.
about any image. They're worried about their next meal. They're worried about these first things first, right? And that's something that's stuck with me since. And what you're saying is really hammering it home, particularly because, again, how do I talk to someone about their religion, and they believe that that's the only thing that's helping them get food, but uh, uh, to
But
parallel.
even that,
Uh-huh.
it is giving them hope that the next life will be better than their hopeless life. You can't fight that. You can't win against that. Somebody who is giving hope, even if that hope is for tomorrow, he'll be preferred to the person who is telling them the reality of today and how to overcome it.
Wow. Wow.
I can tell you, if you went to Nairobi today or any other city in Africa, and you told people on the left, you go, we'll decolonize your mind completely, we'll give you a new mind that is not colonized. And you go on the right, we are giving you food for today and tomorrow. Choose your side. Where do you think more people will go to?
The latter.
Mhm. Exactly.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. So this reminds me of the overarching topic when we first started this. Um, versus fighting the war and maintaining state capacity, right?
Mhm.
Maintain it. I think that then answers this question, that maintaining state capacity is always going to be more important. And that was something I read. To end quickly here. That was something I read about Haile Selassie. Selassie was doing all of these campaigns abroad that he left the home front alone, and that's what gave Eritrea the leg up they needed, right? Because he was ignoring state capacity, back home, and was just completely out of touch with what was actually going on with that conflict, right? Um, and so this is an amazing topic, but you said that was a Ngugi wa Thiong'o set book that you guys had to read in high school called "Decolonize the Mind," right?
Actually, it came after I was already out of school, but it has been read by an entire generation. Yeah,
Got you,
decolonizing the mind.
got you, got you. Yeah, we'll definitely look into that a little bit more. Thanks so much,
And
Professor.
Gugi Wa has spent his academic life trying to figure out how to decolonize the mind, and he's actually one of the most colonized minds because his mind doesn't think anything else other than colonialism.
Hmm. You
Yeah, he is so colonized that he's actually obsessed with colonialism.
What do you mean by that?
That that he has never thought beyond that. Colonialism to him had this far-reaching impact that his sole stake now is about decolonization.
So
And
you don't believe he was correct in that assumption
which assumption?
that colonized you stated that you didn't agree with his conclusion earlier. Are you saying that this is that conclusion that you disagree with?
No, no, I'm saying if I wanted a vehicle towards decolonization, I will not look Gugi wa Thiong'o's way.
Uh,
He's too deep in it that he can't find the beginning or the end. He can't find any way out of it.
okay, okay. Isn't that a similar conclusion to what you stated earlier, as far as there being no place to start and you not knowing where to start?
But that is my point, that the people who are telling us about this have no idea where the beginning is or where the end is.
Neither would we, right? Neither
But
would
you
we
see,
as a
but
younger
you,
generation. So again, like if it's how do you then embark on a goal that nobody knows how to do?
well, that is a very good question. But you see, every time you venture into darkness, chances are that you are likely to die.
I think that's a great place to end it.
Yeah.